Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of the 2022 Higher Education Climate Leadership Summit, where we will highlight how Warren Wilson College has utilized shareholder engagement to make an impact. My name is Nicole Tirico. I'm a program director at the Intentional Endowments Network. And following our land acknowledgement statement at the opening of the summit and Megan Redshirt Shaw's fantastic keynote earlier today, we'd like to again recognize the longstanding history of colonialism that has brought us to reside on Indigenous lands and reflect on our place within that history. We'll be sharing the link to our land acknowledgement resource page in the chat so you can learn more about our journey and the actions we're taking to meaningfully support Indigenous communities across our organizations. With this in mind, I acknowledge that I'm joining you all today from Western Massachusetts, the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the Indigenous people of this land. And I invite the speakers of this session, as well as our participants, to, as you introduce yourselves, kindly state the lands you're calling in from. We'll have an opening poll to get a sense of who is in the room today, but please do use the chat again to introduce yourselves, and throughout the panel, drop in any questions you have for our panelists. I'm so excited to dive into this panel, and I'll hand it over to Alice to further introduce the topic and our speakers.
Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this conversation, and we hope it will be a conversation as the Q&A opens up. Before I begin, as Nicole mentioned, I'd like to invite you all to participate in the poll, which is shown in your chat box. If you go from chat to Q&A to people, it's right next to that. Looks like a bar graph. So that we get a better sense of who is in the room with us, and that will influence how the conversation might go. So based on what we think you may know about shareholder engagement or not, and your interest, it would help us sort of create a conversation that we hope is more meaningful to you. I'll give a minute or two for that to work its way through with everyone. Looks like we still have people joining, so we'll leave the poll open for a minute and let people fill that in to the best of their ability. If you're not part of a university, there is an option at the end to say not affiliated directly with the university. All right. Well, I don't know if it's possible to show results that we have enough. Right now, I'm just seeing the questions. Great. So we have a few people from the endowment staffs here and other staff at universities, and then a lot of folks not affiliated with directly with the university. So this will be your introduction to how the inner workings of a university might be put together to affect important issues of today through corporate engagement, and perhaps help your clients, if they are your clients of universities or your clients, be able to impact those changes. So before, so my name is Alice Donaselva. I am the senior advisor to the on shareholder engagement to the Intentional Endowments Network. Today, I am located on traditional homelands of the Abenaki people, both past and present. I acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and the people who have stewarded that land for generations. Over the past year, I have had the privilege to witness Warren Wilson College accomplish something that no other university or college in the US that I know of has accomplished. Through prudent partnerships with other organizations, Warren Wilson College became an active investor in the true meaning of those words, using their shareholder rights to influence the companies that they own in their endowment portfolio. The college voted proxies for all of the over 1,000 U.S. companies in their portfolio, and they were lead filers on 20 shareholder proposals, asking companies to be transparent about racial and wage equity and to effectively address climate change. Racial justice, social equity, and a zero carbon economy are only possible if corporations become part of the solution. Investor engagement with corporations can be highly effective in compelling real, sustainable, positive change and accountability in corporate policies and practices. Few universities, however, have cracked the code of how to meaningfully engage with the companies that they own in their endowment, how to be a true active investor to effect meaningful change, given their time and resource constraints and the politics of managing an endowment. Here to tell you the story of how Warren Wilson College cracked the code with the help of key partners are Anthony Rust, chair of the Warren Wilson College Investment Committee, Ben Linthicum, Warren Wilson College alum and chair of the college's ESG Advisory Committee, Jalen Spann, head of research at Whistle Stop Capital, which helps investors address material ESG concerns in their portfolio and is responsible for providing the data that we needed that grounded Warren Wilson College's racial equity proposals. And Daniel Stewart, Energy and Climate Program Manager at As You Sow, who has been instrumental in Warren Wilson College's impact on corporate climate change practice. Anthony, can you start us off with some background on the endowment as an active investor?
Absolutely. Thanks, Alice, for introducing me. First, I want to pay homage to my Cherokee ancestry from North Carolina. So to give you the background on our journey at Warren Wilson College and how we have been very active managers of our endowment fund, it really has to start back in 2015 when the student body protested and demonstrated to the board of directors for the divestment of fossil fuels from the endowment fund. And at that time, we undertook an 8-month analysis of the impact on our endowment fund of the removal of fossil fuels, and ultimately came to the conclusion that it was in our best interest to divest of fossil fuels. So at that point, we had the investment committee was really at an inflection point where we're going to just use this as a one-off opportunity to on a negative screen, or were we going to really approach the endowment fund in a more holistic way and address it in a comprehensive fashion from a management standpoint. And we chose to do that. And so we began, along with our investment advisor, to evaluate what opportunities we had for active endowment fund management. And it really started with our investment policy. And what we did was revise the investment policy and incorporated a responsible investment philosophy that did two things. One, espoused the values of our university, and two, sought to generate returns on a market rate risk-adjusted basis. And the two not being mutually exclusive were really in our fiduciary duty. And so we launched that journey in 2015. In 2016, we divested the portfolio of fossil fuels, or began the 5-year commitment to divest the portfolio of fossil fuels, and we revised our investment policy. And what that did was incorporate several things. One, we wanted to incorporate ESG criteria across all asset classes, particularly public equity and public fixed. And we sought out to find managers that would allow us to do that. And so managers that had ESG criteria as part of their investment management processes saw priority from us in terms of capital allocations. On the private market side, we overlaid positive screens in addition to some of the negative screens that we've talked about in terms of fossil fuels, but we also incorporated positive screens. And those positive screens really reflected some of our priorities as an institution, being climate and environment, looked for private market investments that advanced climate and environment issues. We looked for private market investments that reflected racial equity and gender equity. And we looked for positive private market investments that were economically development focused, and particularly in North Carolina, some economically targeted investments. The third thing we did in the portfolio was really diversify our manager base, right? And so we sought out to hire more investment management firms of color, as well as women-owned investment management firms to manage portions of our portfolio. And after a 7-year journey, we're very happy to say approximately 30% of the managers that manage money for Warren Wilson College are either firms of color or women-owned firms. But we didn't stop there. That was on the asset management side. We said if we're really going to manage this portfolio in an active way, we also have to look on the other side of the portfolio, which is be active shareholders. And as Alice talked about, we've been very busy in the past year or two with shareholder engagement and proxy voting. And so in that revision of our investment policy, we formed an ESG advisory committee to help us advance, particularly that side, the ESG shareholder engagement proxy voting side of our efforts. And Ben Lithicum chairs that committee. Ben is also a graduate of Warren Wilson College and actually today an ESG practitioner. And he was one of the students that led the divestment movement back in 2015. So Ben is going to tell you more about our shareholder engagement and proxy voting activities that we've undertaken in the past year.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Anthony. Anthony has definitely been instrumental in a lot of this work. So again, I'm Ben Linthicum, currently chair of the ESG Advisory Committee at Warren Wilson College, and I do ESG consulting as my day job. And I'd like to do a land acknowledgement of the Ohlone tribe here, ancestral lands of where I currently live here in Oakland, California. And so from my piece of this panel, I'd like to highlight two key items that made this Warren Wilson case study a success that I think could be replicated elsewhere and would be useful to those in the audience here, be it you're at a endowment, at a affiliate with a college, or supporting colleges as a sort of investment manager, which it sounds like a lot of the folks in the audience are currently. So those two items are capacity and where capacity might exist at your college and how to activate that, how to build that on-ramp for those with the capacity to do the work of ESG if you're interested in moving the needle on that. And two, the potential for partnerships, the essential need for partnerships and where you might find those as well. So as Anthony mentioned, back in I'm going to rewind the clock even further, back to 2012, when I was a student at Warren Wilson College, the fossil fuel divestment movement was really ramping up. And, I really want to have an impact on climate change, an issue I care deeply about. And long story short, started a campaign with some students, built that community power because we were interested in affecting positive change. Not sure how to do it. There was this, already this campaign going. So we plugged into the fossil fuel divestment movement, and eventually, after 2 years, got a meeting with the trustees, and including Anthony at the time, and still Anthony. And they were very amenable to it, as you just heard. And with that, they did something very clever, which I can't hammer this home enough, of creating an ESG committee to, from my perspective, do two really important things. One, make sure divestment happened, and then two, do all of the other things that an ESG committee could do. Advise the investment committee. So the investment committee at Warren Wilson College still exists, of course, and the ESG advisory committee provides a bit of that capacity to advise how to invest the endowment dollars or direct it in other ways, or just actively manage it without even moving around any of the funds currently being held in existing companies. So with that, the investment committee charter is one thing I would also highlight as crucially important. The investment committee charter gave the committee authority to provide recommendations over a percentage of the endowment. I think this is something that could be replicated elsewhere. And the committee provided, as I said, the on-ramp for students to get involved and have a say. Set the guideposts for this process, that the college could still have the students' voices be heard. So a note about how the committee is structured: it has students, staff, faculty, and administration all sit on the committee. Historically, it hasn't been, we're not all investment professionals. We're interested, but we're really there to be the voice of the college and to make sure the values and the mission of the college is heard through the endowment. So we provide those recommendations, but at the same time, we are still learning and figuring out how this whole ESG thing works, as I'm sure most of us are in the ESG field, and large companies as well are still figuring out what is ESG. So there's education that needs to be done, and this ESG committee provided opportunity for education and provided opportunity for those involved to have some authority for how to manage the endowment. So I think that is the first piece I think would be really useful. The second piece is the importance of partnerships. So the ESG committee started in 2015 and still going now. We're like 6-7 years into it now. And it wasn't until about 2018 we met Alice, and Alice was also very important in all this work in making Warren Wilson a success, and all the support and advice she provided through IEN and networking us. And one of those really important partnerships was As You Sow. And Daniel can give a much better background on what As You Sow does, but very briefly, nonprofit based in Berkeley, helps do shareholder resolutions, proxy voting, helps large companies improve on ESG, improve on environmental issues, racial justice, DEI, and through this leverage point of proxy voting, shareholder resolutions, and engaging the companies to do that. So IEN, importantly, has the skill set, the expertise to navigate the SEC regulations that stipulate what you can put in a shareholder resolution, and then maybe that'll eventually go to a proxy vote. From where I was sitting on the ESG committee, I didn't have that expertise, that background, but we did have the endowment. We had dollars invested in companies. As You Sow had the expertise, the people power to do the hundreds of hours of research into these companies, proxy votes, knew how to tailor the resolutions, write the resolutions. So it was really a match made in heaven with As You Sow with the expertise, knowledge, and Warren Wilson with the dollars invested. And we just matched those up, and two really important things came out of that. One is their proxy voting program, and two is our shareholder resolution successes. So I'll share my screen for some high-level impacts on the successes we've had with the proxy voting program. I think Daniel can highlight a couple of success stories here in a few minutes. So the proxy voting program in partnership with As You Sow is really through this As You Vote platform. So As You Sow does hundreds of hours of research into what the proxy votes are. And if you're familiar with proxy votes at all, there's a lot of them. And doing the research to be informed on how to make a good decision on what to vote on is challenging. And we didn't have the time to do that. So As You Sow met us where we were at and created this As You Vote platform, which allows you to effectively put proxy voting on autopilot. They do the research, provide recommendations. It plugs into a Broadridge proxy voting system. And it can vote our proxies in line with our values. We can also go in and change votes as we want. It's not, totally out of our control. We control as much as we want or as little as we want, depending on our need and interest and what our values are. And so just in this last proxy voting season, we've voted 13,000 proxy votes through this platform at 1,200 companies, and 420 of those were shareholder proposals for climate change, racial justice, political spending, etc. So huge, just to give you a sense of the scale, huge impact for very little work from the endowment side. So we were able to outsource that through As You Sow. So highly recommend the proxy voting program, and I think there'll be links at the end for more on that. And the second really important thing that came out of CSG program were in partnership with As You Sow was the shareholder resolutions. As I mentioned, we have the dollars invested. As You Sow has the expertise to file the resolutions, write the resolutions. And through this partnership, first we identified two key issue areas. So as we mentioned before, we started the ESG committee to do fossil fuel divestment. So climate change, obviously very important to Warren Wilson College, also racial justice, very important. So we narrowed down the ESG committee's interest into these, still very broad categories. And with that, we shared our holdings with As You Sow. As You Sow knows what companies are, potentially leaders and laggards. They work with other organizations to collect data and put out this racial justice scorecard, which I think we'll speak to in a minute, of what companies are doing well and what our leaders and what companies could be doing. So As You Sow can help advise companies on what to do, and they use these shareholder resolutions as an opportunity to have that conversation with the company and help them be better. So at Warren Wilson, we share our list of holdings, and just this proxy voting season, shareholder resolution season, over 30 companies were engaged on Warren Wilson's behalf. 8 companies came to an agreement before the resolutions were filed, 12 more before the general meeting. So already 20 success stories, 20 companies agreed to the ask in the shareholder resolution. So what were those asks? So some of those asks were, racial justice, climate change, climate justice. We got companies to set carbon intensity targets, carbon neutrality targets, be more transparent on their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives through this partnership. So in closing, 2 points I'd like to take away from the segment was there is likely capacity where you are, and it could be through students, and you can potentially activate that capacity with a ESG committee, also bringing in staff and faculty as they're able, and creating a committee charter as a very useful tool for doing that and activating that. And 2, the importance of partnerships. As You Sow would be a great partner. They would love to connect, and I also would love to connect after with anyone who wants to brainstorm other potential options for building the field, broadening our impact. We can't do this alone. And with that, I would like to hand off to Daniel I think we'll highlight some more specific successes of what we've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, happy to jump on. I'm just gonna share my screen. Just checking if this is is Jalen supposed to be ahead of me?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it might flow a little bit better if I give a little bit.
Got it. I will
context before I move on.
Jump back out and pass it to Jalen. And sorry.
Your time will be coming up very soon though. But no, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. And I just want to start off by saying, how grateful I am for this panel and just all the work that everyone is doing, not only within their own organizations, but, also in the impact that we've been able to make through our partnerships. So, I'm a really firm believer in that quote that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Might sound very cliche, but it reigns true in my professional and personal life. So Alice gave a really quick intro on myself and on Whistle Stop Capital. So I'll just go ahead and provide a little bit more color so it's more apparent where, we and our research sit in relation to the Warren Wilson College's shareholder engagement efforts. So Whistle Stop is a consultancy that assists investors in not only identifying, but also addressing important environmental and social concerns within their portfolios. There are, numerous studies and white papers and articles, tons of research out there that have made the link between, strong corporate performance and diversity in a company's workforce. So that's sort of the overarching umbrella and theme that Whistle Stop navigates under and operates in. We work very closely with As You Sow. We manage their workplace equity program, which has done everything from shareholder activism work to creating a rather large workplace equity scorecard that has benchmarked all of the Russell 1000 companies across a number of metric-driven indicators, with the purpose of, one, allowing investors or endowments or, the Warren Wilson College to see what kind of diversity reporting is taking place in the companies that they hold, and two, for allowing companies to see how their reporting practices stack up to their peers and what data sets are of the most importance to investors. I do want to make a note, though, that although we do manage As You Sow's workplace equity program, Whistle Stop is its own entity, and we do this work on behalf of a number of clients. So because of this, we've really been able to build strong relationships with the companies that we engage with. So, they've seen our face multiple times across a number of different issue areas. So I'll sort of start out by identifying, what best practices we've been able to come across and encourage of, our clients' portfolio companies, and then go, a little bit into detail about the workplace equity scorecard that helped inform, Warren Wilson College's decision to file at certain companies. And specifically, I'll mention Berkshire Hathaway more towards the end. So through our shareholder engagement work, we've been able to talk with well over 100 companies in the last year alone on their diversity and inclusion efforts, and also about how they're measuring the success of those efforts, right? How do they know if what they're doing is working? There are many, many commonalities that we've come across in these dialogues, and they have led us to really understand what barriers exist and also pinpoint what best practices are in this area. All of the indicators that we track in the As You Sow Workplace Equity Scorecard are considered best practice reporting metrics. So to the extent that companies are reporting on each one, that should really be a gauge for how they benchmark relative to their peers and the market overall. So the first and sort of low-hanging fruit best practice there is for companies is their public release of their EEO-1 report. Now, an EEO-1 report, I'll just gloss over it really quickly for those who aren't familiar with it. It's a mandatory report on a company's workforce for those organizations that have over 100 employees that details what the makeup of their workforce is, broken out by gender and racial categories, right? So it's a very standardized report. And this report is legally, companies have to gather this report. Now, where the issue is, where the gap is that they're not required to publicly release those numbers. Now, I say EEO-1 reporting is sort of the low-hanging fruit because, we've seen a major push from the investing community for the release of this data set, and not even have seen, investors have been pushing for years for this data set. It's also low-hanging fruit because at this point in time, about 83% of S&P 100 companies are releasing this data set, making it, pretty apparent to those companies who aren't releasing it that, hey, we're starting to be left behind by our peers. And if we're having hesitation on, releasing this report so late in the game, then chances are we will continue to be left behind. The next best practice in reporting is the release of a company's promotion, recruitment, and retention rate data. Now, these data points in tandem are known as the inclusion factors. How valued are employees feeling, and are they able to positively contribute in their roles? Do they have an equal chance for upward mobility and opportunities? And these data sets didn't just come from out of thin air. We didn't just say these are the ones that seem important to us, right? We know through our conversations that these are the ones that the board is actively reviewing and are collecting to some degree internally. Promotion allows us to see what groups of people are advancing at what rate, and which ones aren't. And promotion is actually the statistic that not many companies report on. They shared that promotion is a tough one to report on for them because, promotions can be different for each organization. Is a lateral move considered a promotion? Should they factor in how long it takes for certain groups to receive promotions? Is a pay increase the same as a promotion, even though they have the same job title? And so on and so forth. There's a lot of arguments we've heard, but and I know I'm talking a lot about metrics, but we've always encouraged the release of both quantitative and qualitative data for this very reason. The explanation in addition to the data set allows external parties to have a full understanding of the numbers and leaves nothing up for interpretation. When we talk about recruitment, we mean who's joining the company, what groups of people are being hired and at what rate. Companies are usually really forthcoming with this one, with their recruitment rate data, so we don't have as much of a hard time there. I do want to drive home that this data set is very important, though, because I know we have all seen diversity commitments that speak to wanting to have more diverse representation within the company, right? But if you're not tracking your recruitment rate data, how do you as a company know that you're making progress on these efforts? And not only for internal use, but how do external parties know that these goals are being met? It may be, companies have been hesitant because it may be that their numbers aren't looking so good, which I want to throw out there and say that it's fine. Companies have shared that they're hesitant to release their data on their workforce because their numbers just aren't good. And what we tell them, is we go back and say, no one's numbers are great. The tech industry specifically overall has a bunch of work to do on increasing representation of people of color and providing, more equitable advancement opportunities. So you're not the only one. You're not alone. And, that argument is not a strong enough reason to withhold this information. And the last inclusion factor that's considered to be best practice is the retention rates. What groups of people are leaving the company and at what rate? Are employees being hired, but are they not sticking around because they get there and they look around and say, there's no one that really looks like me that I can identify with, either within the organization as a whole or within leadership positions. And that's a very large statement for a company to have tons of diversity at the entry level, but slim to none within the executive and C-suite positions. So, to an employee of an underrepresented group, that looks like, well, I'll never have the opportunity to go further than the position I'm in right now. And the last data set we looked at in the workplace equity scorecard, that's not a part of the inclusion factors, is the company's release of explicit quantifiable diversity goals. So moving away from, we want to increase representation of people of color and more towards, we want to increase representation of Hispanic employees by 20% by the year 2025, right? That sounds much more tangible, much more trackable, much more identifiable. So that was a little bit about the workplace equity scorecard. There is a parallel racial justice scorecard that As You Sow's racial justice program oversees. So if anyone would like more information on that scorecard, then definitely please reach out to Olivia Knight, and she'd be happy to engage with you on that one. Berkshire Hathaway specifically, I want to provide like a tangible example of why most endowments or investors would file with the company. So Berkshire Hathaway specifically has been a major concern, given that they have around 62 subsidiary companies, which is a pretty wide sphere of influence. However, Warren Buffett has been known for taking I'll let the companies operate as they see fit and not really intervene in any way approach to his management style. But of those 62 companies, and this is sort of where the concern comes in, 7 companies have released some form of workforce demographic data. 1 company has released some level of recruitment data. 1 company has released some level of promotion data. None of Berkshire Hathaway's companies have released retention data, and 1 has released its EEO1 report. 1. And a number have been involved in a number of lawsuits and allegations related to racial discrimination. So, as you can see, the Berkshire Hathaway portfolio as a whole severely lagging. We actually filed with Berkshire Hathaway last year on behalf of As You Sow, requesting that the board oversee a report that assesses the effectiveness of the company's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and specifically report on the metrics that I previously mentioned. If you remove Warren Buffett's shares, right, because some companies tend to have high executive ownership, making it very difficult for certain resolutions to pass. If you remove Warren Buffett's shares, we would have had a majority vote of investors asking to see their diversity data, and that proposal would have went through. And now Berkshire Hathaway has a pretty similar resolution on the proxy again. So, given Berkshire's highly decentralized model, Buffett's lack of oversight and little regard for, keeping up with the times and staying abreast of investor concerns, Berkshire has and continues to be a concern. So before I kind of close and pass it to Daniel, I do really want to push this notion of partnerships being so important to achieve the impact we're all trying so hard to make. Whistle Stop as a consultancy, we don't hold any shares in these companies. It's organizations like As You Sow and endowments like the Warren Wilson College Endowment that allow us to do this work. So now, As You Sow has their hands in many different pots and do a lot of great work and engage with companies on a number of different issues. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Daniel to share more about As You Sow's climate work.
Brilliant, Jalen. Thank you very much. I will go back to sharing my screen. Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can see that. Great to be on the call with everyone. Happy to be here and wonderful speakers so far. My name is Daniel Stewart. I'm the Climate and Energy Program Manager at As You Sow, and I'm currently on Ohlone lands in the Bay Area. Just want to reiterate what everyone else has said and how critical it is to have this collaboration, to have these partnerships that kind of enables this impact. As You Sow is an investor representative. We do all the research. We do, look for the most impactful strategies where we can find progress on these different ESG issues. We carry out a lot of the engagements. We carry a lot of the negotiations, and then the need for escalating to resolutions or starting to challenge boards as well. And so in this presentation, I'll just give a little overview of the work with Warren Wilson College and how that enabled some pretty significant steps forward in the climate change space. Get to the next slide. Okay, great. So we've been focusing in on the power and gas utility sector, and in specifics, the scope 3 emissions that currently are not really accounted for. And so if you see this little chart of the EIA in the corner there, you can see where utilities kind of reside and just the magnitude of emissions that they have influence over. So electricity being 1/4 of total national emissions in the US, and then commercial and residential buildings being over 10%. So currently natural gas accounts for around 40% of that electricity production, and coal nearly 20%. There's also a huge amount of supply chain emissions impact. So methane, flaring, other leakages around the production and the transportation of these fuels. So it goes beyond just the burning of those fuels. And then in addition, pumping gas to residential and commercial buildings for space heating and for cooking, which are then combusted there as well. So there's a huge amount of influence and impact that these utilities sit upon. The next slide. The issue that we have found is that with all of these utilities making announcement on net zero targets, those targets are not comprehensive. The current net zero targets only cover their scope 1 operational emissions. So that's only the coal, the natural gas that's burned for power generation, and then some of the methane leakage from their operations. So essentially the pipes that they're connecting into buildings to ship in natural gas. So they're not comprehensive. They're not covering those upstream greenhouse gas emissions, such as methane leakage from the production of coal and natural gas. A lot of these utilities are also not even calculating those emissions, so they don't know of the exposure that they have, the extra climate impact that some of their choices have. They're not, those targets are not covering customer use of natural gas downstream, so the huge amount of gas that is used for space heating in buildings currently. And it also doesn't account for power purchased to supplement their generated power. So they might be buying coal-fired power or gas-fired power off of the grid to supplement their current generation. And so the importance of having net zero targets comprehensively cover all of these different emission sources is for it to inform strategy, to inform investments. If they don't have a comprehensive view of what is included in their value chain, they might be mismanaging investments, choice of infrastructure to support multi-decadal infrastructure in the natural gas value chain, when it might be better to choose a different route. So they're mismanaging where disruptive risk might emanate from, and they might miss out certain opportunities to benefit from the clean transition. So to give an idea of the companies, the utilities that we engaged this year, to kind of have an idea of the magnitude of the emissions they currently do not account for in their climate strategies. Duke Energy, which is the largest power utility in the United States, has over 25% of its greenhouse gas emissions not currently covered. That would likely grow as well because they are not measuring their value chain greenhouse gas emissions. Southern Company, which is the fourth largest, over a third of their greenhouse gas emissions are not covered by its current net zero target. Again, value chain emissions are not measured. Dominion is the eighth, that's over 40%. They're doing a better job though of measuring their value chain emissions, and then DTE, the 17th largest, is over 40% as well. And with the support of Warren Wilson, that enabled us to lead these longer term engagements with Duke, with Dominion, and carry through on filing with them on this topic. So again, just to reiterate, there's a lot of reliance on natural gas. This is creating exposure to investors around infrastructure that could be invested in now, that would have 10, 20, 30, 40-year operational lifetimes. These could be stranded. It's also investment choices along those lines are slowing the clean transition. There's also the additionality of all the value chain greenhouse gas impacts. A lot of our conversations have also led to utilities offering inadequate solutions, so renewable natural gas, methane created from captured waste, and green hydrogen, which face issues such as scalability, massive cost issues. And again, if you have a better lens with which to view your net zero aspirations, having those targets in place, you have a greater feed into the scalability. You're not going to be making those same choices for technologies that cannot scale to get you to that ultimate goal of net zero. We're hearing a lot of excuses around, this is too hard. This is not our problem. This is for our customers to deal with. This is for our suppliers to deal with. But again, utilities sit in that middle ground. They're procuring this. They have huge influence over their regulators, over policymakers. They can put pressure on their suppliers. They have influence over their customers as well. And so they do face these disruptive risks. And so again, setting targets that encompass their full scope of emissions help to mitigate that risk. And then on the policy level, we're seeing in areas like Colorado, California, New York, this increased policy focus on building electrification that is showing this surge in potential disruption for gas businesses. And kind of underpinning that need for a North Star goal of net zero. On the flip side, we are seeing some progress. So some utilities, such as Dominion, have started to measure and disclose those upstream Scope 3 emissions to get a greater idea of what they are contributing to and exposed to from an emissions standpoint. We are seeing some utilities also expanding their net zero targets to include their gas business, to include residential and commercial customers' use of natural gas. So SoCal Gas in Southern California is one, and Excel is another. And then also seeing more standards and benchmarks coming out, such as the Climate Action 100 Plus, which is 70 trillion in investors and assets under management, and the Science Based Targets Initiative, which explicitly state that in order to be Paris 1.5 degree aligned, in order to achieve appropriate net zero reductions, you need to include those material scope 3 emissions for which you're accountable to. And then the progress. So this is really where Warren Wilson College enabled a huge amount of progress with our work. Over the last 2 years, we have been engaging with Duke, Dominion, and a few other peers. And, like being in the room, stressing the import and the risk creation of covering these emissions, of having appropriate long and short term targets that are aligned with the Paris Agreement, bringing other experts into the room to kind of build rapport and further the negotiations allowed for progress. Ultimately, we did this year have to escalate our engagement through filing resolutions with both Duke and Dominion, but they came to the table with us. We negotiated a withdrawal, which led to them expanding their net zero target to cover all of their purchase power, all of their value chain greenhouse gas emissions from the fuels that they procure for their natural gas business and their power business, and also covering customer use of natural gas. So we see this now as the new high mark for utility net zero targets. And going into this new shareholder year, we can leverage the progress with these two companies that are in the vanguard for climate progress into setting an expectation for the entire industry, shifting progress for the entire industry. And again, just to reiterate, where utilities sit in terms of that 10% of emissions, national emissions that come from piping natural gas to buildings, and that 25% of national emissions from the production of electricity, this has a huge outsized impact on climate. This is these new commitments that have been accelerated by years because of this collaboration between Warren Wilson College and As You Sow has led to huge new strategies, has led to a huge amount of capital shifting direction to cleaner technologies. And so we're looking forward to this next year and further collaboration with Warren Wilson and any other colleges that would like to get involved as well. So happy to pass it back to Alice and then answer any questions that people might have. Thank you.
Hey, Alice, if I could just summarize, because I think there's a mechanics piece that is important for folks to know, particularly if you're a smaller endowment fund. And so just to summarize the process, the asset management side of Warren Wilson College set up a separately managed S&P 500 account so that we could own shares in a number of different companies, so we could take action on shareholder engagement and proxy voting. Commingled funds, particularly for smaller endowment funds, it's not the vehicle to be able to have an active shareholder engagement proxy voting program. So we took this S&P 500 separate account where we own these ownership pieces of these different companies. Our ESG committee met and deliberated and identified 3 priority areas: climate, racial equity, and gender equity. And then we, through our partnership with IEN, we're able to identify service providers like As You Sow and Whistle Stop to be able to help us execute on the process and the mechanics of shareholder engagement and proxy voting. So,
thank you, Anthony. You said that was going to be part of my fill. I will add to that for those of you who are in the endowment office, using a separate account for domestic equity, I usually have heard 2 bars to that from endowment managers. And that is one, that the investment minimum is too large, but that is not the case in domestic equity. It is true in international equity. And secondly, that it's more expensive. But in general, an actively managed domestic equity account is the same separate account or commingled. It's a bit more expensive to do what Warren Wilson College did, which is a passively managed account, but it's pretty negligible, under 10 basis points more, for the ability to really engage with the companies you own. And it's only through that engagement that we're going to see the change we need to happen. So just so glad that you brought that up, Anthony. And I do have a few questions, so I'm not going to speak much more. We'll wrap this up with everyone at the end. And Anthony and Ben, I think I'll start with this question on Warren Wilson College. process from Adam Leach. Was it an easy progression from divestment portfolio implementation to shareholder activism, or was there some hesitancy to take that next step? What happened during that conversation that made the path forward clear?
Yeah, I think this is a good one, a great question. We get this one a lot, and it's particularly centered around our investment committee. And if you think about it, going back, 10 years, some of our investment committee members needed to be educated on the impact of environmental social governance criteria on the portfolio, and really adopt a new lens by which to move forward with our fiduciary duty, as opposed to the traditional or conventional old lens, which was we're solely focused on returns. And ESG sounds a lot like philanthropy or social impact. And really, that meant we needed to spend a lot of time educating our investment committee on the fact that ESG criteria impacts the returns on the portfolio. And ignoring those criteria is detrimental, and doesn't really allow us to take a comprehensive, or our managers to take a comprehensive look at the underlying investments that they're considering. And so it probably took us a couple of years to really get full consensus from the investment committee as to the value of ESG, of impact investing, of positive screens, and the analysis of how that impacts the portfolio, both positively and negatively.
If I could jump in here, Anthony can definitely give much better perspective, having been on the investment committee, still on the investment committee at Warren Wilson College. So 2 points I think are important to highlight here is one, like to make that jump. I think a lot of the hesitation comes from the question of what are the issues that we're going to be jumping towards. And historically, yes, those issues have been like environmental and social justice. But if you're at a college, one could imagine a college that doesn't necessarily agree with, or endowment that doesn't agree with those issues. Shareholder activism, it's agnostic. It can be really any issue you want it to be. So I think that could be, if you're trying to broach that conversation and push the needle for board members who might be less interested in taking that next step in shareholder activism, you can really let them pick what issues they care about, and then propose, like, sure, we can go after XYZ initiative that you might be most drawn towards, and that maybe could be a way of moving that a little bit. So one of the first steps we did was to identify what issues we care about. So climate change, racial justice were the issues that the ESG committee identified as wanting to take action on. And then the second piece I would highlight is that if you're not doing shareholder activism, you're really leaving some of your authority as an investor on the table. If you're not voting your proxies, generally those are going to go towards management, and then management is voting them for you. So if you have the time and can do the research and have the know-how to do proxy voting and resolutions, it really just lets you be a better steward of your investments, and you can actually push companies in a more positive or profitable way if you wanted to, and use your shareholder resolution and proxy voting to do just that.
Thank you, Ben. Got a question for Jalen also. Earlier in this summit, one of the speakers talked about the SEC's recent climate rule and the potential for the SEC to also focus on board diversity and diversity disclosures next. What are your thoughts on that, and how could that boost shareholders and activists pushing for those disclosures?
Yeah, I sort of answered this in the chat, so I'll reiterate. But I personally think the SEC having a new ruling on diversity disclosure reporting would be absolutely amazing. As it stands right now, activists and shareholders were having to engage, with each company individually. So I think an SEC ruling would definitely at least get all companies on the same track, and we'd be able to more easily have some level of, or some threshold of standardized reporting to be able to compare apples to apples. Because right now we're trying to compare apples to oranges to kiwis to, and it's just not, it's not feasible in the long run. I think the SEC recently, at the end of last year, did have a ruling for board diversity. That basically requires, most of the NASDAQ listed companies to either have or explain why they don't have at least 2 diverse directors, one female and one of an underrepresented minority or the LGBTQ community, and to publicly disclose certain diversity stats about their board on an annual basis. So it's a good place to start. And I will be optimistic that, we can get the inclusion factors that I mentioned on that list as well.
Great. Thank you, Jillian. And I have 2 questions for Daniel, so I'll put them both to you, and then we can wrap up. We have a few minutes left. So Daniel, first, there's a question on what are the opportunities? You mentioned sort of getting more endowments involved. So what are the opportunities for collective engagement by endowments, such as if other endowments were co-filers with Warren Wilson College, would that have increased your leverage when engaging with those companies? Or is it, what do you see as the, what tangible benefits of collective action by endowment?
Yeah, no, happy. The great question. This would be hugely useful for us. I mean, SEC under Trump changed to make it more restrictive to allow us to file. So, I mean, I think there's multiple different benefits of having collective engagement work with us from the endowment side, so that we can easily be like focusing on multiple issues with a singular company, whether it be, racial justice and climate change on one particular company, or if there's multiple different angles of a climate issue that you can file on multiple different things. And then finally, kind of what George was getting to in terms of having 3, 4, 5 names behind a proposal also kind of helps land with more impact, that there's more collective support, there's more AUM behind it. So yeah, 100%, this would be fantastic. And feel free, if you are an endowment, to reach out to myself, and we can have further discussion about how we could work together.
And then a more sort of technical question from Joanne Hansen. Does As You Sow also work with Glass Lewis or only ISS? And I'm not.
So we work with both ISS and Glass Lewis in terms of when we have a number of different filings at the end of the season, we'll promote it and kind of discuss with the ISS, with the Glass Lewis team, why it should be supported by their platforms, why it should be supported by investors. In that same vein, we also meet with BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard to communicate with their team as to why they should be supporting these resolutions, why this improves de-risking and ESG management by asset managers.
Great. And I don't know, Joanne, if your question was also about the As You Vote platform, which is relatively new. We'll provide a link to that. And also the partnership there is with Broadridge Financial Services, I think it's called. So happy to, you can email me or someone else and we can give you a little more information on that. So I think we are at exactly 5. So I'm going to leave it up to Nicole whether we have time to do wrap-ups for each person or whether you just want to wrap this up.
Apologies for the cameras to come back on here. I think if everyone has maybe one quick sentence of a quick takeaway that they'd like to share, and then I can wrap us up.
Okay, I'll start us off and turn it to Anthony. I think what I'd like to share is that, endowment managers, because of the complexity of the task, often leave this up to their commingled fund managers or their asset managers otherwise. And those folks have other interests, I would say, often trying to win the pension business of a company, for example. So frequently they vote with management. That's changing, But we have a recent report from As You Sow about overcompensated executives, for example. Very few asset managers have voted against excessive pay packages. So that's not in your benefit financially for your portfolio or from a value perspective. And I will turn it over to Anthony.
Yeah, I would just say that regardless of the size of your endowment fund, you certainly can be impactful. So I wouldn't shy away from the fact that your endowment fund is, $60 million like ours is, or $500 million or $1 billion. There are opportunities to have your voice heard and make an impact and align your endowment fund management, the asset management side, shareholder proxy voting side with your values. I'll pass it to Ben.
So building off of that, yeah, I ran the numbers on this, and we've had orders of magnitude of influence based on like market cap of the companies we've been able to influence. So you run your own numbers, you can have a huge impact. Second point, let's work together. Let's have a follow-up call if anyone is considering implementing this at your own endowment or in partnership with a college or endowment. We would love to support and work together in any way that seems fit.
Yeah, and I will follow that up with just stating my last point about how partnerships are really so important. There may be hesitancy to jump in there with your endowment and really figuring out what the process looks like and how to go from start to finish and, what resources are currently out there. But, there's never any better time to start than now. And, look at all these different organizations we've had speaking today, and we've really all been able to come together and make the impact that we've been trying to make. So as Ben and Daniel have said, definitely reach out to anyone on this panel if this is something that your organization feels is ready to jump in on.
Yeah, I'd just say the more the merrier. Looking forward to working with any other endowments that want to grow their impact in a positive fashion. Thank you for the time to talk to you all.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to Alice, Anthony, Ben, Jalen, and Daniel for sharing the pieces of this leading and inspiring story. And as each panelist mentioned throughout their presentations and in these closing remarks, partnerships and collective engagement are central to making this work successful. So if you're an endowment stakeholder or work with endowments that would be interested in learning about how you can engage as shareholders and be a part of this work, we welcome you to learn more, as everyone said, by reaching out directly through reading the links in the chat. And I've also put an invitation in the chat. We would love for you to join our next shareholder engagement working group call, which is scheduled for May 3rd. And there's that link to register. Each of these fantastic panelists have agreed to join that call to follow up, answer any questions that you have, and focus on our partnership with As You Sow, the As You Vote platform, and how endowments can follow Warren Wilson College's lead and utilize proxy voting and shareholder resolutions to steward their endowment investments. So please do reach out with any questions. We hope to see you on that follow-up call. Thank you again to our panel. We're excited to continue the conversations and talk soon.